All right, good morning and welcome to our channel. Today, I'd like to talk to you about annual recertification for those of you who have Section 8 vouchers. Many of you have been troubled by this process or are confused as to what's supposed to happen, how often it should happen, or possibly your PHA is not even doing this on time. So, in that respect, I'm going to help you better understand what your rights and responsibilities are. I'm going to walk through all the different steps of recertification and all the potential outcomes with it to help you. Before I do that, my name is Jay. I'm the owner of Section8Consulting.com, and today I'm going to go ahead and switch screens. That way, give you a little information, move my little face around on the right side, and you can see we have a phone number up here as well as a web address and my email for our office. I've worked at the federal level for nearly 26 years with clients, helping them navigate the system, as well as hundreds of landlords and working with other places like law firms and others that are interested in this, including investors. So that being said, let me pull up some notes for you guys. This will help you out. And I'm also going to post these notes in the description and comments section because I realize many have. Sometimes I go through these videos very quickly, and so this will allow you an opportunity to read the notes as well as those that have learning disabilities. So, in this process, the Section 8 annual recertification, officially called an annual reexamination, is the Housing Authority's yearly review of participating household income, assets, expenses, deductions, and household composition. In other words, they're looking to see whether your circumstances have changed, whether they need to go up or down on what they're offering you, and to either reduce it or possibly give you more. So the purpose is to determine whether the household remains eligible for assistance, the household's updated adjusted annual income, the tenant's new share of rent, the housing authority's payment to the landlord, whether the voucher, bedroom size, or utility allowance should charge, and whether everybody living in the unit is properly authorized, which is extremely important this year as the administration is taking a very serious approach to immigration-related matters. Federal regulations require public housing agencies, better known as PHAs, to re-examine the housing choice voucher household's income and family composition, and you can find that under Title 24 CFR 982.516, and I'll provide that linkage as well. Keep in mind, information will be in the description and comments section. So we move to number one. So when does the annual recertification happen? The Housing Authority normally begins the process 60 to 120 days before recertification effective date. However, many of you may experience months, if not even a whole year, where it skips. So I will explain a little bit later in the video what that means. The exact schedule depends on the Housing Authority's administrative plan, and that's the key to this. If you don't have their administrative plan, then you should request you do a Freedom of Information Act, better known as a FOIA, and then you request a digital copy, not a printed out with the printer copy. You'll pay a lot of money for that. So a digital copy of the administrative plan. Many PHAs will keep that on their website. So, for example, recertification effective date of October 1st, initial packet may arrive June, July, or August. Documents and interview may be due by July or August. The new tenant rent usually begins on October 1st, so you can see some examples there. And these are hypotheticals, right? So, tenants should not wait until the anniversary date. The deadline in the Housing Authority's notice or online portal controls that annual recertification is generally required even when the household income has not changed. Everyone receives Social Security or other fixed income. The tenant rent is already zero. The Housing Authority recently completed an interim recertification. The tenant has lived in the same unit for many years. And should also consider that some moving to work housing authorities have HUD approved alternative recertification schedules, and such as biennial or triennial reviews. And so I think that's quarterly. And sometimes they divide it up in 4 or even 3s with that. Always check the local administrative plan again. So that's the administrative plan for your local PHA or public housing authority. So what information must be reported? The household must provide complete and accurate information about every household member. That's called the household composition. Report should include everyone currently living in the unit, anyone who's moved in or out, births, adoptions, marriages, separations, or deaths. Also, foster children and foster adults, living aides, children temporarily away from the home, college students, and household members who are temporarily absent, proposed additions to the household. Keep in mind, guys, some people are divorced and sometimes you share the responsibility of custody. That's a complex matter. I would advise reaching out to my office to figure out what your responsibilities are in terms of federal rules. Do not allow someone to move in the assisted unit without obtaining any approval required by the housing authority landlord. Look, guys, anytime a person, and it depends on the state, anytime the person exists in your home, sleeps there greater than 7 to 14 days, you run the jeopardy of having them be an attendant, not only by the lease, but also by HAP contract. It's important to determine those rules based on the state that you live in. So income, common sense, common income source include wages, salaries, tips, commissions, and overtime, self-employment and gig-related work, Social Security, supplemental income, as well as SSDI, pensions, retirement income, unemployment compensation, workers' compensation, child support, alimony actually received, regular contributions from people outside the household, reoccurring payments, trusts, and annuities, public assistance, certain military pay, income generated by assets, even the food stamp card. If you have TANF, it gives a cash value. The food stamps are not counted, but the cash value you can withdraw with the ATM is, okay? Moving on from there, one additional thing. Look, when grandma and grandpa give you money at Christmas, things like that, they really want you to report that. But that can be a contentious topic when you have friends and family giving over cash. I would advise reaching my office. You want to determine whether or not you're going to be violating policy or whether or not that can be proven. Not every payment is a countable income. Certain benefits, reimbursements, temporary payments, and other sources may be excluded under federal rules, including medical costs. There's a rather long list of that. Again, you'd probably want to reach out to my office. So that goes on. Now, assets. The housing authority may ask about what you own, and that includes checking and savings accounts, cash app, prepaid card balances, certificates of deposit, stocks, bonds, investments, retirement accounts, depending on accessibility and program rules, real estate, trust, life insurance, cash value, cryptocurrency, assets sold and transferred for less than fair market value, incomes produced by assets. And so there's a lot of things you consider, and it's about 14 pages that are income and assets under federal rules. Deductible expenses, that's the good one. That means it's a negative. It doesn't count as an income, but rather a deduction of income. So, depending on household circumstances, the rules currently implemented by the PHA possible deductions include dependent deductions, elderly and disabled family deductions, unreimbursements, medical expenses, or qualifying elderly or disabled family members, disability assistance expenses, reasonable child care expenses necessary for work, school, or qualifying activities, and other deductions authorized by HUD or the PHA under their administrative plan, which we mentioned before. You need a FOIA or Freedom of Information Act to determine that. Keep receipts, billing statements, proof of payment, mileage records when permitted, insurance statements, child care agreements, and other provider documentation. Number 3, documents commonly requested. The exact checklist varies, but tenants may be asked to provide government-issued photo identification, Social Security cards, birth certificates, immigration and eligibility status documents when applicable, recent pay stubs, employer verification, Social Security, SSI, pension, and benefit letters, unemployment statements, tax returns, W-2s, 1099, self-employment, property and loss records, bank and investment statements. Let me stop there. Self-employment, that's a contentious subject too and has special rules. You might want to reach out to my office on that if you're running a business. Cash app or payment platform statements, child support, payment history, school enrollment records for adult students, child care statements, medical and pharmacy expense records, health insurance premium statements, proof of household changes, zero income certifications, and consent and release of information forms. There's a lot to be considered, and this is not a definitive list. This is the short one. For reexaminations effective of January 2024, HUD issued a form, and it is HUD 9886.A. Although the Housing Authority may also use and authorize local forms under HUD 9886-A. Number 4, what does the Housing Authority verify income? Well, the Housing Authority does not rely on documents submitted by the tenant. It may compare the information against third-party sources, including HUD's Enterprise Income Verification System, Social Security Administration records, federal, state, and wage databases, unemployment records, employer verification, bank and financial institution records, benefit provider statements and tax documents. Look, there's a limit. They say all that, but I know they don't have access to many of these federal databases, okay? But don't let that be the reason you attempt to lie. Don't do that, okay? Moving on from there, HUD's EIB system provides employment and benefit information used by PHAs to verify eligibility and rental assistance. In other words, the state will snitch on you and it will tell you about everything you're doing there to earn income in that state. They have access to a lot of state records, but they don't have a lot to federal, like the bank and so on. And so they'll ask you usually to print it out. You have to provide your own proof. And so we move on. If the housing authority finds a discrepancy, the tenant should receive a opportunity to explain it and provide supporting documentation. If you had a problem with that, reach out to my office. We are by appointment. A database match is not always proof of current income amount is going to be correct. So there are some things you can dispute. Common explanations include employment ended, hours were reduced, records belongs to a different person, inventory was income was temporary, gross income was confused with net income, benefit amount changed, duplicate income was counted, self-employment expenses were not considered, old employment remained in verification system. And so you must keep in mind housing authorities have a high level of error, okay? And a lot of times you may have miscalculation on your rents going up, and so it's important you fight those because they're not always right. In fact, we get a lot of cases regarding that, and once we go through verification process and informal hearing, it's usually determined that you did not have the right to raise your cost or your rent portion, okay? Remember to respond in writing and keep copies of explanations and evidence at all times, guys. How is the tenant rent recalculated? Well, the PHA generally determines the accountable annual household income. Everybody over 18 is an income earner. Subtract the applicable deductions and determine the adjusted annual income. Calculate the total tenant payments. Applies the voucher payment standard. Applies the utility allowance and determines the family's rent to the landlord and housing assistance payment. Look, there are a lot of things in software across the internet, and none of that stuff's going to be worth using. I'm going to tell you why. Public housing authorities, each one writes an administrative plan that determines how they do those calculations. They use third-party software in most cases. It is special to that PHA. There is not a nationwide PHA system to calculate rents. Therefore, unless you have an administrative plan and policy procedures, all these calculators and other nonsense across the internet is worthless. It isn't worth anything. In many HCB cases, the total tenant payment is based on the highest applicable calculation, meaning that 30% of the monthly income, adjusted income, 10% of the monthly gross income, applicable welfare rent, and PHA minimum rent subject to hardship protections. That's another subject matter all on its own when we talk about hardship protections. The amount paid directly to the landlord is not necessarily exactly 30% of the income. The final tenant payment can also be affected by the following: whether gross rent exceeds payment standard, the utility allowance, the contract rent, the bedroom size, the minimum rent rules, proration rules, previous payment standard protections, and local moving to work policies. The 40% affordability cap normally applies when a family initially leases a unit where the gross rent exceeds the payment standard. It is not universal ceiling, preventing the family's share from later exceeding 40%. And after income rent payment standards and or utility allowance changes, you have what they call a HUD rent and HAP contract guidebook. I advise take a look at that link and then try to interpret that. If you struggle with that, reach out to my office. I offer appointments. I'm telling you guys, this stuff, you can go down a rabbit hole with this. Trust me. All right. So annual recertification is not the same as interim recertification. Annual recertification is the scheduled yearly review. And interim recertification happens when annual reviews, because of reported change, such as loss of employment, reduction in work hours, new employment or income, household member moving in and out, loss or increase of benefits, new child care, medical or disability related expenses. One thing that's really, really critical, guys. I know most of you guys don't read contracts. That HAP contract will indicate you need to be making these changes every 30 days. Do not wait to do this once a year. If you do that and the housing authority catches your hand in the cookie jar by not reporting, then they've got a really good case to terminate you. Do not think you're going to come back later and give them a different story. Stay ahead of this. So moving on from there, the PHA's administrative plan determines when changes must be reported. Some PHAs require reporting in 10 days and others at different time frames. 30 days is usually the golden standard. However, there are some exclusions to that, which include 10 days. Under the current Federal Administration reexamination rules, the PHA generally must process qualifying decreases and certain increases meeting the applicable threshold. Special rules apply to earned income increases, prior interment decreases, and changes occurring during the final 3 months of the certification period. You can read about that at Title 24 CFR 982.516/C. All right, so we're dipping deep in the federal rules. Number 7, what happens when the paperwork is late? Failure to complete an annual recertification can result in delay in processing retroactive rent increases, repayment agreements, notice of proposed termination, termination of voucher assistance, and possible action by the landlord if the subsidy payments stop. Federal rules require that the family provide information requested for annual and interim reexaminations and to sign the required consent forms under Title 24 CFR 982.551. You can read about that. I'll hyperlink it. If the deadline cannot be met, you must contact the housing authority before the deadline, explain the reasoning in writing, request an extension, submit a waiver of documentation, which are currently available, identify documents still being requested from third parties, and keep proof of submission, along with a follow-up until the receipt is confirmed. A tenant with a disability may request a reasonable accommodation, such as additional time, help completing forms, paper forms instead of an inaccessible portal, communication by email or mail, telephone, virtual, or home-based appointment, permission for an authorized representative to assist, notices in an accessible format, and reinstatement when disability-related circumstances cause a missed deadline. The request should explain the connection between disability-related limitation and the accommodation being requested. Detailed medical diagnoses ordinarily are not necessary when limited verification of disability and a need is sufficient. All right, got 2 more parts to go, guys, and then we'll be wrapping up the video. I know we've been at this 16 minutes, but this is how it goes. So, last but least, after recertification, the housing authority should issue a written notice explaining the result, including effective date, annual income, adjusted income, tenant portion, housing assistance payment, utility allowance, payment standard, contract rent, household composition, and voucher size, if changed, and review every number compared the notice with. So submit income documents, approved deductions, household members, bedroom size, payment standard, utility allowance, rent to owner, and effective date. The request to complete rent calculations worksheet or, if applicable, portions of HUD's 558, which is another form, if these numbers are unclear. And this is where I'm going to stop with this video because I don't want to go too far. I'm going to post the rest of the notes in there. It's about another page, okay? The important thing to keep in mind, guys, is you're at the liberty of the administrative plan that is created by the PHA, submitted to HUD, and approved by HUD, okay? They can drag their feet as much as they wish, as long as they give you fair notice, and you may not always get that. If you have problems with your recertification or questions, I strongly advise you get with my office or another qualified professional to help you through this. It's a lot of federal rules. A lot of things can happen, and some of you may even be up for termination. For others, this may just be a meaningful conversation to determine whether things are going right. Either way, my company's information is up there, and I look forward to talking to you guys. All right? So let me close out the notes, and quick message here. I do live videos on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays, generally at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. Great time to bring up questions and join us live. Lots to talk about, lots of news. Otherwise, we do pre-records almost all other days, okay? And that's to teach you guys. It's what I call my EDU videos. All right, it's been a pleasure talking with you guys, and I hope you have a wonderful week or weekend, all right? Bye for now.